My name is Ava. And until that morning, I believed I had a good marriage. My husband Matthew and I had been together for 8 years. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was stable. Matthew was organized, dependable, and the kind of man who always seemed to know what needed to be done. For 4 years, he'd also been there for my mother. When I was away for military training, Matthew drove her to appointments, handled insurance problems, picked up medications, and even built a ramp over the front steps. I trusted him completely. That was why I never questioned his business trips. He always had an explanation. A client in Chicago, a meeting in Baltimore, a conference somewhere else. He gave me itineraries, hotel names, flight details, and just enough information to make everything sound legitimate. That Monday morning was no different. Matthew came downstairs wearing a pressed suit, his carry-on rolling behind him. Chicago again, he said. 3 days. Maybe 4 if the client wants Friday too. Same client. Same one. He kissed me quickly, then crouched beside my mother. Take care of each other. It seemed like such a small gesture. But to me, it meant everything. Then he looked at me. You sure you don't need to head to Belvoir before noon? 3, I reminded him. Right. 3. He repeated it under his breath, as though checking something against a schedule. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? 8 years of marriage had taught me his habits. I watched his SUV disappear down the driveway. Then I turned back toward my coffee. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps. Not the quiet mechanical sound of my mother's wheelchair rolling across the hardwood. Actual footsteps. I turned so quickly that I knocked my spoon onto the counter. My mother was standing. For 4 years, I had believed that wheelchair was permanent. Now she was standing in front of me. She took one careful step. Then another. Mom? I felt tears building in my eyes. You can walk. I expected her to smile. She didn't. Instead, she looked toward the window, checking the driveway, making sure Matthew was really gone. Then she whispered, "We need to go now." That was when I knew this wasn't a miracle. It was a warning. She reached into the cushion of her wheelchair and pulled out a small white envelope. Inside was a brass key and an address for a storage facility in Alexandria. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed Matthew to believe I still couldn't. I stared at her. She tightened her grip around my hand. Your husband thinks I'm helpless, Ava. That's why he stopped being careful around me. Suddenly, the last 4 years looked different. My mother told me Matthew had started asking questions months earlier. Not normal questions. He wanted to know whether I planned to leave the military, whether I seemed stressed, whether I forgot things when I was tired. At first, she thought he was worried about me. Then she heard him talking in the garage. He didn't know she could hear him. As long as she keeps signing what I put in front of her, we're fine. Those words stayed with me. I had trusted Matthew because I believed paperwork meant protection. If he handed me something official, I assumed someone had already checked it. He knew that. And apparently, he'd built his entire plan around it. My mother had secretly regained the ability to walk with her therapist whenever Matthew was gone. Then she returned to the wheelchair before he came home. She stayed silent because she wanted to hear what he said. When he believed nobody was listening, we drove to Alexandria. Neither of us knew how much of our lives had been hidden inside that storage unit. The building smelled like dust, cardboard, and old paint. My mother climbed the stairs slowly beside me. I kept looking at her legs. For years of seeing her in that wheelchair had trained my brain to think of her as fragile. Now every step felt like another piece of reality shifting underneath me. She stopped in front of Unit 214. This is it. I put the key into the lock. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I opened the door. There were boxes everywhere. Not random boxes. Organized ones. My name was written on several of them. Bank. House. Military. Divorce. And one smaller box simply said, AVA signatures. My stomach dropped. I opened the first box. Inside were copies of financial statements, mortgage documents, credit card records, and correspondence from a bank I'd never personally contacted. Then I found something that made my hands go cold. A home equity line of credit. Against our house. I had never agreed to it. I hadn't even known it existed. My mother watched my face. There's more. She pointed toward another box. Inside were photographs. Matthew standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. The same woman appeared in another picture outside an apartment building. Then another. Then another. Her name was Vanessa. Suddenly, Matthew's business trips weren't just suspicious. They had a pattern. Chicago, Arlington, Baltimore. The dates were written beside each photograph. I pulled out the Arlington lease. Matthew had been paying for an apartment there, while I was sitting at home believing he was traveling for work. For a moment, anger took over. I wanted to call him. I wanted to ask him how long he'd been lying. I wanted to hear him explain the documents sitting in front of me. My mother grabbed my wrist. No. I looked at her. If you call him now, he'll know what we found. She was right. I hated that she was right. So instead of calling him, I photographed every page. We made copies. We wrote down dates. We separated what we knew from what we suspected. Then we called an attorney. Her name was Claire Donnelly. She listened without interrupting. When we finished, she asked one question. Has Matthew been told about any of this? No. Good. She told me not to confront him. Not to access anything that wasn't legally mine. Not to threaten him. Not to contact Vanessa. And absolutely not to post anything online. If he knows you have evidence, Claire said, he'll start explaining it before you finish documenting it. That sentence changed everything. Until that moment, I thought I was trying to catch my husband. Claire made me understand that I didn't need to catch him. I needed to preserve what he'd already left behind. Over the next several days, we built a timeline. The financial records came first. Then the apartment. Then the draft divorce documents. Then the recordings my mother had secretly preserved. One recording stopped me completely. Matthew was talking to someone in our garage. His voice was calm, almost casual. He was discussing what he believed would happen once the divorce started. Then he said the sentence my mother had already repeated to me. As long as she keeps signing what I put in front of her, we're fine. I listened to it twice. Then a third time. It wasn't the voice of a man preparing to leave a marriage. It was the voice of someone who believed he'd already arranged the ending. And that was when Claire noticed something else. The signatures. Some of the documents carried my name. But they didn't look right. Not obviously wrong. Not enough for me to notice casually. But different. Claire sent them to a forensic document examiner. While we waited, Matthew continued behaving normally. He called me from his business trip. He asked about my mother. He complained about traffic. He told me he missed home. I answered every call. I acted exactly like the wife he believed he was deceiving. That was the strangest part. For the first time in 8 years, I was listening to my husband without believing a word he said. Then the document examiner called. The signatures didn't match my verified samples. That wasn't a feeling. It wasn't suspicion. It was evidence. And suddenly I understood Matthew's biggest mistake. He thought official-looking paperwork made his story stronger. He never considered that paperwork could be compared. My military records could be compared with his claims. Bank records could be compared with his timeline. Travel dates could be compared with apartment payments. Verified signatures could be compared with the ones on the documents. His story didn't need to be defeated by emotion. It only needed to survive the facts. And it couldn't. Matthew still believed he was winning. He thought his business trips were buying him time. He thought the documents protected him. He thought my mother was helpless. And most importantly, he thought I was still the woman who trusted every explanation he gave me. He had no idea that by the time he came home, we wouldn't be waiting for an explanation. We would be waiting for him to see what we'd already found. Matthew came home on Thursday evening. His SUV rolled into the driveway just before 7. I watched through the kitchen window as he grabbed his suitcase from the back and checked his phone. Everything about him looked normal. That was almost the worst part. He walked through the front door smiling. "Miss me?" I smiled back. Of course. He kissed my forehead. Then he looked toward my mother. She was sitting in her wheelchair near the window. Hey, Eleanor. How are you feeling? She looked at him. Better. Matthew nodded casually. Good. I brought you something. He placed a small box of chocolates beside her. For years ago, that gesture would have touched me. That night, I could only think about the recordings in the storage unit, the apartment, the financial documents, the signatures, the divorce papers, and Vanessa. Matthew walked into the kitchen and began telling me about his trip. The client had been difficult. The hotel had been terrible. The flight home had been delayed. He had 3 meetings. He had barely slept. I listened. Then I asked one question. How's Vanessa? His voice stopped. Just for a second. But I noticed. His eyes moved toward me. Vanessa? I nodded. The woman at the Arlington office. His expression changed. Only slightly. But it was enough. Ava, I don't know what you're talking about. I reached into the folder beside me. You will. I placed the Arlington lease on the counter. Then the bank documents. Then the draft divorce papers. Then the financial statements. Matthew stared at them. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because he needed time. Ava, where did you get these? Does it matter? Yes. Why? His expression hardened. You went through my things. No. I pushed the signature analysis across the counter. I went through documents connected to my name. He picked up the page. His eyes moved across the report. Then back to me. These are preliminary. They're enough to ask questions. He suddenly changed tactics. You've been under a lot of stress. There it was. The narrative he'd been preparing. Ava is emotional. Ava is overwhelmed. Ava forgets things. Ava isn't stable. I could almost hear his words from the fabricated incident log. I looked at him. You've been preparing this for a while, haven't you? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward my mother. Eleanor, tell her she's not thinking clearly. My mother said nothing. Matthew turned toward her again. You've seen how stressed she's been. Still nothing. Then he made the mistake I'd been waiting for. He walked toward her wheelchair. Eleanor, please. You know she's not herself. My mother placed both hands on the arms of the chair. And stood. Matthew froze. There was no dramatic sound. No warning. No explanation. Just silence. My mother straightened her back. Then she took one step. Then another. She walked directly toward him. Matthew backed away. His face had completely changed. What? My mother stopped a few feet in front of him. You should have been more careful about what you said around me. Matthew stared at her. You can't walk. She shook her head. I couldn't walk 4 years ago. Then she pointed toward the folder on the counter. But I could listen. That was the moment Matthew finally understood. The wheelchair hadn't been his protection. It had been ours. For months, my mother had listened while he talked. She had heard him discuss the divorce. She had heard him discuss my finances. She had heard him talk about the apartment. And she had preserved what mattered. Matthew looked at me, then at Eleanor, then at the documents. His carefully controlled world suddenly looked very small. You recorded me? My mother answered calmly. When you thought I wasn't paying attention. He looked at me again. You can't use those. Claire had already explained what could and could not be submitted. We weren't going to make legal claims we couldn't support. We weren't going to exaggerate. We were simply going to provide the evidence through the proper process. And that was exactly what happened. The financial records were reviewed. The suspicious signatures were examined. The timeline was reconstructed. His claims about my military schedule were compared against actual records. The apartment payments were compared against his supposed travel dates. The documents he thought would strengthen his position instead created questions he couldn't answer. His fabricated narrative didn't collapse because I screamed louder. It collapsed because the records contradicted it. Vanessa eventually learned that Matthew hadn't told her the full financial story either. She ended their business arrangement. The consulting venture they'd been building never became what he imagined. Matthew's professional circumstances also changed after discrepancies connected to the matter were reviewed. The legal process took time. There were meetings, documents, questions, negotiations. Nothing happened overnight. And, honestly, I'm glad it didn't. Because justice that depends on one dramatic moment is easy to misunderstand. What happened to Matthew wasn't one punishment. It was the accumulation of consequences created by his own decisions. He had built a story. The records told another story. He had relied on signatures. The signatures were questioned. He had relied on my trust. That trust was gone. And he had relied on my mother being powerless. That assumption was the one thing he could never undo. Months later, my mother walked with a cane through a small park near her home. She wasn't completely recovered. She didn't need to be. Every step was enough. I walked beside her. For years, I'd thought she was the person who needed protecting. Then I realized something. She had been protecting me too. Matthew had spent years believing strength looked like control. He was wrong. Sometimes strength is sitting quietly in a wheelchair while someone reveals exactly who they are. Sometimes it's refusing to react when reacting would make things easier for the person who hurt you. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop protecting someone from the consequences of their own choices. I used to think trusting someone meant accepting their word without hesitation. Now I see it differently. Trust and verification can exist together. You can love someone and still read the document before signing it. You can believe someone cares about you and still ask questions when the numbers don't make sense. And you can forgive someone without giving them access to your future. My mother taught me something even more important. She had spent years being treated like she was powerless because people only saw the wheelchair. Matthew saw weakness. I saw vulnerability. But my mother saw an opportunity to observe. She didn't need to fight him. She didn't need to threaten him. She simply waited until the truth mattered more than his performance. That morning, when she stood in the kitchen, I thought I was watching my mother walk again. I was. But I was also watching myself stand up in a different way. I stopped being the wife who automatically believed every explanation. I stopped being the daughter who assumed I had to protect everyone alone. And I stopped confusing loyalty with silence. Matthew wanted control. What he eventually lost was the ability to control what other people believed. Because once the records were organized, the truth didn't need me to shout. It could speak for itself. Maybe that's the part of this story worth remembering. You don't always win by fighting harder. Sometimes you win by staying calm long enough for the truth to become undeniable. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought your silence meant weakness, remember this. Being underestimated can become an advantage when you use the time to see what others don't. Because sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one who sees everything.